I want to thank everybody for coming today to our cost-free webinar on the self-injury compendium for trauma-informed interventions for people who self-injure. So today's webinar is really designed to introduce you to the compendium and to really encourage you to read and use the compendium. So let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Gabriella Grant. You might know me. I am the director of the California Center of Excellence for Trauma-Informed Care, and we've got a great website. The compendium is on the website. If you ever lose your compendium, just go to the website and download it again. It is there for you. Stay in touch. Let us know what you think. We are interested in hearing from you. Let us know. Here's the compendium. This is what it looks like. We have other publications on the website. So if you like this one, you might like the other ones. But this is what I'm going to be talking about today. This compendium and the information that's held inside of it. Reissued in 2024 based on an early version from 2011. So if you read the whole compendium, you'll see at the very end, we mention a little bit from whence it all comes. So the first thing that the compendium talks about is what self-injury is from a trauma-informed perspective. And generally what we're going to say is self-harm, self-injury in all of its forms is some attempt to deal with pain, some attempt to make it visible, manageable, healable, feelable. So self-injury has to do with the experience of pain and how to deal with it. So self-injury can best be understood as a coping mechanism to deal with less visible forms of pain. However, the specific form of pain, the specific meaning of how they're dealing with it, and why this form of self-injury as opposed to that form of self-injury is individually defined and decided. But broadly speaking, self-injury is a form of dealing with pain unsafely, but nonetheless not uncommonly. So we're going to explore that today. Some of the reasons why a person might self-injure, again, is individually decided and determined. But here are some of the reasons that I've heard over the years. To end a dissociative response, to distract away from overwhelming emotions, to express self-hatred through punishment, to reconnect with the reality of being alive today, to show the pain or to make the pain visible, especially to self, sometimes to others, to release endorphins for immediate, if temporary, relief, to displace emotional pain from the psyche to the body, and also, finally, to manage psychiatric symptoms, for example, voices. So feel free in the chat if folks want to say other purposes or meanings or strategies, why people have self-harmed. So if you please put it in the chat, let us know what other ones. Again, in the compendium, we really clarify that each individual who self-injures has their own purpose and meaning. But they can be categorized, and some people simply don't know. Yes, Shannon, to end that dissociative response, to end a flashback, to end some sort of spiral that one is going into. Yes, from that internal to external, from an unknowable, unseeable, internalized sense of dread to, oh, it's a scratch, it's a cut, it's a burn. Yes, yes. It is fundamentally an attempt to meet a need. And from a trauma-informed perspective, we're going to move in this direction, that the unsafe behavior, the self-injury, is an attempt to meet a human need. Another thing that self-harm is, self-injury is a trauma symptom. Go to the chat. Does self-injury count as a PTSD symptom in the DSM-5 TR? Does self-injury count as a PTSD symptom for the PTSD diagnosis? Go on to the chat. Let me know. Victoria, I'll vote yes too. So the answer is yes, Todd Henry. And it is under the hyperarousal category, and it's called reckless and self-destructive behaviors. So in the DSM, it's called reckless and self-destructive behaviors. Erica Boone, do you remember that? Finette, nice to see you. Finette, do you remember that from the PTSD diagnosis? Reckless and self-destructive behaviors. It was added in 2013. Trauma survivors are more likely than people without trauma history to turn to self-injury to manage negative emotional states. If you are working with somebody who self-injures, that is telling us a lot, possibly everything we need to know. A large body of evidence clearly shows that trauma exposure, and even more predictably, ongoing PTSD symptoms, increase the risk of engaging in a wide variety of self-harming behaviors, including self-injury. And in the compendium, you'll see that there's about there's a lot of pages of references. Check them out. It's a large body of evidence. A self-harming behavior generally, but specifically self-injury, is a trauma symptom, and therefore we're going to treat it as such. Traditionally, folks, if you've been around for a while, traditional treatment for self-injury has basically been, let's control the uncontrollable. Stop self-injury. Cutter, stop cutting. Burner, don't burn. Whatever it is, don't do that. And using behavioral contracts in order for a person to, affirm that they will not self-injure. However, they don't work. Shame-based approaches typically force the behavior underground, where it becomes more dangerous. So the traditional, don't do it, stop doing it, you're going to get in trouble if you do it, sign a contract saying you won't do it, restraints, et cetera, tend to actually increase the behavior. We also recommend in your agencies reassessing policies that cause an immediate reaction, resulting in police, ambulances, commitment, restraint, and seclusion for incidences of self-injury. We're going to see that most, and the compendium goes over this in detail, most self-injurious behavior is not a suicidal attempt. I'll talk about more of that later on today. But an immediate reaction that all self-injury is suicidal tends to, again, push that behavior underground, making it more dangerous. At this stage in psychiatry, psychology, institutionalization of people with mental health problems, the use of behavioral contracts should be 100% voluntary. The American Psychiatric Association, all the way back in 2010, I can actually follow up with you and give you the citation of it, said that the use of behavior contracts should be diminishing, and that it's not an evidence-based treatment for self-injury or suicide for that matter. But we go over it in the compendium in a little more detail. So if we're not going to control the uncontrollable, and we're not going to tell kids to stop doing it, what are we going to do, Gabby? What is the adult role? What is the professional role if a client is self-injuring? We have to do something. And I agree with you. So we're going to recommend harm reduction techniques as a first line response in general for self-injury. And the more we use it for self-injury, the easier it is to use harm reduction for a wide variety of issues, including substance use and other unsafe behaviors. So, harm reduction is our first line response from the evidence. Harm reduction is a practical, transformative approach that incorporates community-driven public health strategies, including prevention, risk reduction, and health promotion to empower people with the choice to live healthy, self-directed, and purpose-filled lives. So, feels good, harm reduction right there. But, what does it really mean? People might have heard some controversies over the years about harm reduction approaches. So, what does it really mean? Well, I'm going to tell you that in my mind, I use the word saferly. Harm reduction means how to do things saferly. So whatever you're doing, you can do it more safely or saferly. What we're doing constantly with self-injury, other self-harming behaviors, trauma-related symptoms, all kinds of related concerns, is we're asking our client, given that you engage in this behavior, is there anything that you can do to make it safer? So we're always increasing safety, and that is how we reduce the harms. So reducing the harms is by increasing safety. And that saferly approach probably feels more comfortable to most people than, oh, you can, self-injure as long as you don't, kill yourself. So that's not harm reduction. Harm reduction is whatever behavior you are engaging in, you can do that saferly, more safely. And that's true for your client who self-injures, but that's also true for you. That's also true for me. So all of us can engage in saferly behaviors. Harm reduction approaches teach individuals to measure and then reduce their own unsafe behaviors. Harm reduction techniques are not let people do whatever they want techniques. Harm reduction techniques are skillful techniques that encourage people to become aware of what they're doing and then to do it more safely, measuring whether unsafe behaviors reduce as a result. So harm reduction approaches teach individuals to measure and then reduce their own unsafe behaviors. It's a reduction. It's harm reduction. It's a reduction model. And as a matter of fact, abstinence is part of the reduction model. It's the end of reducing. You get to zero eventually, but it does not, require abstinence. We get to abstinence without requiring abstinence. And this is rather than ignoring the amounts or frequency of use when using. So what we're saying here in a harm reductionist approach is one of the safest skills, one of the saferly skills that anyone can learn is how to measure their own unsafe behaviors. And then to become aware of what they're doing when they're doing it, rather than ignoring the amounts or frequency of the use. So we're moving in harm reduction from being unaware to becoming aware. Harm reduction can help people to become aware of the results of safety changes in their own lives. So awareness is safer than not being aware. Measuring is safer than not measuring. That is going to be one of our ways of working with people who self-injure. In the compendium, we talk at length about teaching a scale and intensity scale. So self-injury, self-inflicted violence, is but one of a category of self-harming behaviors. Even self-injury can be categorized. So let's just start at the bottom. So self-injury can be categorized as no self-injury. This would be self-injury that is seldom or slight or silly. Very few moments of self-injury, very occasional or very low risk self-injury. So, the fact that I scratch myself or bite my nail or pinch myself really hard does qualify as self-injury, but it's very, very low. Then we go up the intensity scale. Let's go to lower. These are self-defeating, self-injurious behaviors. What this is behaviors that cause infection or embarrassment, things that are self-defeating, but would never send a person to the hospital, for example. But they're still there. They exist. The next level is self-injury. So this is now where the individual is causing themselves muscle damage, soft tissue damage, broken bones. So we're getting into the injurious level here, and this might require a visit to the doctor or to the hospital. This is a significant level of intensity of self-injury, but it's not the highest. The highest form of self-injury is self-annihilation. So suicide is the highest form of self-injury, but it is not the only form of self-injury, and not all self-injury is self-annihilating. So what we're doing right here is we're helping people to start to see, oh, okay, when my behavior goes into the lower or none zone, that's saferly. If it goes even from the highest to the high, that's saferly. If it goes from high to lower, well, that's just safer. For most people that I've encountered don't automatically use a scale for self-injury or other self-harming behaviors. So these scales have to be taught. They have to be taught. They do involve usually math because we're measuring, but math can be displayed visually too, such as in this example today. The decibel scale. The decibel sound level chart is a visual example of the intensity of sound, decibels, right? So let's start at the bottom. At the very bottom of this scale is 0. No self-harm, no sound. Keep in mind, all intensity scales have a 0, right? So we have to put a 0 in our scale. Don't start your scale at 1. What 1 signals is that there's always self-injury. What 0 signals is the absence of self-injury. So make sure that you put that 0 in there. But then here we go with our decibel, right? And it goes along with self-injury. 10 decibels, breath. 20 decibels, rustle of leaves. 30 decibels, wisp. 40 decibels, refrigerator. 50 decibels, rain. 60 decibels, normal human chatting. 70 decibels, vacuum cleaner. 80 decibels, truck. 90, hair dryer. 100, helicopter. 110, trombone. 120, police siren. 130, jet engine. 140, rocket launch. So you can see whether you have adolescents or children or adults, older adults, that this scale allows people to measure how much self-injury I'm engaging in. It's going up to that pink zone, folks. It's getting bad. Oh, it's dropping down to that lower zone. We're going in a good direction. We're going in a good direction. Saferly, a saferly direction. Okay. All of that, again, is in the compendium. So we've got a couple of other suggestions for folks. We have a little graphic in the compendium to snapshot our recommendation. So our overall recommendation is to use harm reduction techniques to get that safety focus in your therapy or in your treatment or in your program as an acceptable evidence-based model for intervention. Then we're now working with a client, okay? So now we're working with a client or clients. First, use universal precautions. I'm going to go over this in detail. However, generally speaking, what we're going to say is most people with mental health, substance abuse, and other related concerns who are involved in the publicly funded system, which we all represent, have high levels of self-injury. We have the research, but it's only when the kid is caught that we become aware of it. Or it's only when the person tells us that we become aware of it. In a public health model, that is too little, too late. Instead, number one, use universal precautions. All of us as human beings engage in some form of self-harming behavior. Some of us, it's so low as to not even be noticeable. For others of us, it's so high as to be unavoidable how dangerous it is. But what isn't going on is only a couple of humans self-injure. What isn't going on is only malfunctioning people self-injure. Self-injury is actually very common. So we're going to use universal precautions, and we're going to use data, evidence, research to support ourselves in it. Generally, what universal precautions says is that we're going to treat everyone equally and protect everyone equally, which means I am going to talk about self-injury with all genders, not just with girls. I am going to talk about self-injury with all clients, not just ones who tell me about self-injury. So what the first shift here with all your clients is, it's just better to talk about self-injury in general terms with everyone than wait around until somebody tells you. And that's usually too little, too late. Equal treatment, everybody protected. We're going to increase safety with everybody. These skills are transferable. This scale works for debt, DEBT. Can you see that? All the way down at the bottom, zero debt. All the way up at the top, bankruptcy. So, these are skills that are just so highly transferable that we really want to give them to everybody. By me talking about self-injury first, I alleviate disclosure responsibility on the client. I broach the subject, then the clients decide whether they want to say something or not. However, if I have an inkling, which I should have it a lot, if I have an inkling that someone might be self-injuring, ask directly. We ask directly. Be respectfully curious. I'm wondering if you might be self-injuring. That's just the question. Explore that underlying purpose or meaning before telling somebody they have to stop. Notice patterns, become aware. Notice patterns, become aware. If a person is engaging in self-injurious behaviors, they will benefit from grounding techniques. Self-injury is a painful form of grounding. But there are non-painful forms of grounding that your clients just might not be familiar with. So increasing grounding techniques within your treatment is going to give people a safer alternative to the self-injury. Use grounding to safely detach from emotional pain. Become centered in the here and now with grounding techniques as opposed to self-injurious techniques. Non-violent grounding. Non-violent grounding. Number 4 is develop a safety plan. We agree on a plan. It's written down. However, if it's dangerous for the person to have a written down safety plan, what we recommend is writing it down and then destroying it. I'll talk more about that in a second. Finally, use the compendium. Read the compendium. It's here for you. We recommend using page 10 and the last 2 pages, Appendix A, for your clients. So everyone, if you have access to the compendium right now, check out the last 3 pages. We recommend that you give those 3 pages to your clients. So number 1, universal precautions. It's important to emphasize the voluntariness of any choice to disclose anything at any time. Only by informing the client of their right not to disclose can any disclosure of self-injuring be ethically addressed. So I'm not telling folks they have to tell me. I'm telling folks it's not uncommon to self-injure. Is that something that is of concern for you? So I'm not saying, oh, holy moly, you're the only kid that has ever done cutting and we're reacting very strongly to it. Instead, I'm saying lots of kids self-injure, many of them hide it, only some let adults know what's going on. So the shift is much more on you, the adult, you, the professional, you, the informed individual, to be able to maintain these universal precautions, which will ultimately result in more honest disclosure. Another way is to ask directly. In the compendium, we have these questions for you. Is self-injury a concern for you in any way? How does self-injury help? What might this behavior be saying to you? Why now? Why then? Have there been times when you were able to resist self-harm? So what we're doing here is we're saying, I'm concerned, but I'm not panicked. I'm concerned, but I'm not going to control you. I have information and I can deal with what's going on. Let's handle this calmly. It's more respectful, but ultimately we're going to get better information from it. And then I might say this. It might be useful to remember that talking about self-injury is a first step towards managing the harmful behavior. Self-injury, self-harm, substance abuse, like trauma, grows in silence and darkness. Bringing the self-injurious behavior into awareness, into the light, into awareness, just makes it less dangerous. If you're not already using Seeking Safety, I highly recommend Seeking Safety. It gives you a lot of ways to do all of this stuff all of the time. But in particular, Seeking Safety does have a topic called the Detaching from Emotional Pain Grounding topic with a really nice script. And I will refer you to that script for grounding. Sydney, can you find our grounding video on YouTube and give it to everybody via the chat? So I do have a grounding video on YouTube somewhere. Sydney can find it and put the link in to the chat so people can see what grounding sounds like. Grounding techniques help the person safely detach from emotional pain and become centered in the physical reality of the here and now. Grounding brings real relief. My most symptomatic clients want grounding all the time. It's very beneficial, and it provides a really good alternative to self-injury. Number 4, develop a safety plan. We recommend that your agency, or if your agency doesn't have it, you yourself have a standard safety plan, a standard form that you're very comfortable using. A safety plan is a written guide for a person to get through a known risky or dangerous situation. Do you know what self-injury is? It's a known risky behavior of whenever this individual is with themselves, typically alone. So safety planning, in the case of self-injury, safety planning is done whenever this individual is going to be alone. So we're just going to incorporate safety planning all the time because people are often alone. And then there's also other people who are dangerous out there and require safety planning. So this is really a model of safety planning as treatment, right? We're doing safety planning a lot more frequently. Safety planning around known dangers helps people to deal with unexpected and unknown dangers. So when I have a safety plan for something that I know is dangerous, when something else dangerous happens to me, I know at least better what to do. It also helps people to be prepared for life. Difficult situations occur in all kinds of situations. And unfortunately, the trauma survivor might feel that they have to face those situations with no preparation. But the big news is you can prepare for situations, all situations, using a safety plan. Safety planning can also be implemented before, during, and after. So this is news to people. Most people think a safety plan is to get them not to use, not to cut, not to burn, not to purge. But a safety plan can help prevent an action, but it can also be used to reduce the intensity of an action, and afterwards helping the person to care for themselves rather than beat themselves up again using self-injury, which often happens. So a safety plan is a before, during, and after plan as well. Use the handouts. Use more handouts. If you already know me pretty well out there, you know that I often mention handouts. That's the public health model. More handouts. And then interventions to help the individual apply information to their own lives. And then, evidence-based medicine, evidence-based interventions that deal with a diagnosis. So the whole model of using handouts, getting more people information before they directly ask, we're giving it to them in universal precautionary approaches. It allows the clinician to then help the client to apply that information, and then also to reduce the reliance on, the development of a diagnosis, in this case, maybe suicide, right? To reduce the chances of a diagnosis, but also to be able to more effectively address that diagnosis when it does happen. So the public health model is on the basis of the use of handouts, public information, giving clients information, ideally in writing, written in ways that they can best absorb that information. And that is what that appendix is all about. If you notice, the appendix is full of saferly strategies. We encourage you to hand out these handouts to your clients. All right, folks. So let's recap. We're talking about self-injury, which is a subcategory of self-harm. Self-harm is a trauma symptom, both in the DSM, PTSD, as well as really on its own merits on a body of evidence that's pretty undeniable. Therefore, we're going to address all unsafe behaviors as trauma symptoms. And we're going to teach people through harm reduction how to become aware of their unsafe behaviors and to find saferly strategies to meet their underlying human need. We're going to use this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 model generally with all of our clients. Most of your clients are self-injuring in some way, if not self-inflicted violence, substance abuse, or unsafe relationships, or gambling, or other stuff. So we're going to have to address it more broadly. Ask directly about taboo subjects in a way that's respectful and curious with concern rather than panic or the need to control it. Build your set of grounding techniques. Give handouts about those to your clients. Check out the YouTube that I did. Do your own YouTube. Use a written guide for a safety plan and generally use more handouts and use our last 3 pages of the compendium. But what about when there's an actual injurer, somebody who is actually injuring? So now we're zeroing in on someone who is self-injuring or threatening to self-injure. Typically, this is a hotline call. So I'm going to kind of address it from a hotline perspective. But if you do crisis intervention, or let me know in the chat what kind of scenario you would be like coming upon a person in the act of self-injury. But typically, we're talking about a hotline. This is a quote from a person who self-injured for more than 30 years since they were 8 years old. And this person said, "My experience has been that I've gotten more useful support from calling a women's crisis hotline, whose purpose is more for interpersonal violence, than I ever got when calling a mental health crisis hotline. For people in my local area who ask me about coping with self-injury, I still refer them to the women's crisis line more than I do the mental health crisis line." Folks, go to the chat. What does the women's crisis hotline, the domestic violence crisis hotline, have that the mental health crisis hotline doesn't have? Go to the chat. Why would a domestic violence hotline be a safer place than a mental health crisis hotline? Go to the chat. Let me know. You know, Shannon Rapp, women focused, maybe even trauma focused, which is really a really good point. I love that. A peer model, Celeste. You know, oh, this is something that is in the the domestic violence arena here. This is what people who are victims, who are survivors, do. Yes. You know, Sonia, I think you are right in the sense that people call the domestic violence hotline a lot. I'm not sure if that's more or less than the mental health crisis hotline, but they get a lot of action. That's for sure. Kylie, Kylie, I think you win the prize. The survey says Kylie, number one, ding, ding, ding. Very few women's hotlines have hospitalization as their go-to. Talking you down, sticking with you. It's called, in the domestic violence field, it's called non-judgmental empathetic listening. It's non-judgmental empathetic listening. It's just a constant process that helps a person calm down, and then they safety plan. So we have something to learn, from the domestic violence field in terms of working with people who are self-injurious. And I am going to give you some of these lessons from the women's crisis hotline. The first one is putting the person first. So in a domestic violence hotline, non-judgmental empathetic listening is the person first. So putting the person first is our first priority. The person who is asking for help wants support for whatever is driving their need to self-injure. The struggle the person is having should be the priority, not the self-injury. The person is struggling. Self-injury is a strategy. So it's not the big deal. It's the person and their struggle. That's the big deal. The struggle the person is having should be the priority. Oh, not the fact that they self-injure. It is important to teach staff about reducing re-traumatization and how re-traumatization can potentially leave a professional or their agency liable for causing needless harm. So I don't want to scare you here, but what we're really doing in this, putting the person first, is we're making sure that our response is commensurate to the intensity level. And sometimes suicide is on the table. If an individual is engaging in a suicidal crisis, we assess for suicidality on the crisis line, and then we go back to putting the person first. But if we have determined that there is an active suicidal risk going on, then we engage in our policies. We engage in what we do for any kind of a suicidal call. However, the person on the hotline doing the crisis intervention puts the person back in the center point. Priority number 2, inform on choices and rights. Consumer education about hotlines and how they work, including disclosures, liabilities, and limitations. So even if you're not a hotline, inform your clients on choices. Now that I have this information, I am now required to call an ambulance, right? Giving this information is going to be the best way to work with your clients. Empowers the callers to understand the workings of the service they are calling and to make informed choices on their own when talking to hotlines. Focus on individuals' rights. So, you have the right to, deal with yourself the way you want to. And you have the right to tell me what you want to. We are concerned about you and want to protect your rights to make sure that you're as safe as possible. So again, we're bringing all that safety language in, seeing if we can reduce the intensity of the crisis, and then we're going to get into safety planning soon. Then priority number 3 is stopping the current crisis. So it's the third priority. First, the person, then their rights, then stopping the crisis. A hotline worker can assess for suicide, then immediately shift to person-centered support once the assessment has been made regardless of the level of suicidal threat. You can just simply inform them what it means, but we're using the person-centered approach. Grounding techniques to help the person safely detach from emotional pain and become more centered in the physical reality of the here and now can bring real relief. How do I know? I'm going to scale it. My grounding technique has a scale inside of it. Brings real relief and provides an alternative to self-injury. In this case, maybe even a suicidal crisis. And then priority 4 is developing a safety plan. We already talked about the safety plan, but here what we're saying is, do you have a safety plan? What has worked in the past? Can we develop a safety plan for today? Who is available for you to help you with your safety plan today? Can I provide you with a list of resources from the compendium and safety skills, the safe coping skills? As a matter of fact, Sydney, can you attach the safe coping skills in both English and Spanish so people have those as well? May I provide you with a list of resources and safety skills for you to read over? Would you be willing to try a safe coping skill from the list before self-injury? So what the compendium really tries to do is to give you everything you need for the big picture, the medium picture, and an intervention of a crisis that involves some sort of self-harm or self-injury. It's really designed to help you as a professional stay grounded, stay safe, and be able to intervene saferly with your very clients. And with that, I want to say thank you. If you have any questions or comments about the compendium, we're all ears. But ideally, the compendium is going to answer all your questions, and you are going to be able to be saferly today and every day. With that, I just want to say, everybody, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time. All right, everyone, we've done it another time. Stay in touch, stay safe. Have a great day.